Marie Ortiz. I'm co-chair of Housing, Health, and Human Services. My co-chair is Joe Restuccia.
Little louder, hard to hear you.
Oh, it's hard to hear me. Marie Ortiz, co-chair of Housing, Health, and Human Services. Co-chair with Joe Restuccia. This is the November, yes, the November monthly meeting. Per the governor's order, we're still meeting remotely, and this is being recorded, and it's going to be live streaming on YouTube. It can also be, it'll be accessible after. The agenda materials for tonight's meeting are on the CB4 website. You can also sign up for the CB4 e-blasts. If you've never attended a meeting before, really quickly, usually what happens is the presenters give a presentation, the committee asks questions, and then members of the public or attendees can speak. Then the discussion goes back to the committee. On some items, we vote and write a letter of support or write a letter making recommendations. If you want to be able to speak, just raise your hand when it is time for public members to speak. And tonight on the agenda, we have, the first item is the historical review of the process of CB4, for CB4 for proposing social services in the district. I hope that made sense. I think I said it correctly. The second thing is the inclusionary housing proposed applicant guidelines. And then we'll talk about Midtown Community Court and then new and old business. Joe?
Yes, I'm ready. So first, our meeting's gonna be a little bit different tonight. Normally we have external presenters talking to us, presenting something, we are engaging with them. We're really having a conversation among ourselves tonight, talking both about process for social service citing of social service facilities and also inclusionary housing. That discussion we started on inclusionary housing last month. We'll have it again tonight, and then hopefully we will finish it in December and bring the recommendations for the updated policy and the checklist to the full board in January. I think it's good to go through these things more than once, so we all get them, understand them, and ask lots of questions about it. We thought it was important to start tonight because we've had so many issues about social services, how they're managed, how they're cited, what's happening, especially for new members that have been on the board for a long time, talk about the normal process that we've had with the City of New York and social service providers. So I'm going to put up a presentation, talk about that, and then specifically talk about specific case studies where we've had both success and lack of success with social service providers. Give me one moment. Okay. Should be coming up full screen in a second. There we go. So the goal is to go through the presentation and then stop every step along the way, ask questions, and talk about what people understand or believe should or shouldn't happen in this whole process of social services. It has really been a process of collaboration over the years. That's how our board has worked. Social services, we have worked with social service provider, city agencies, the community board, and elected officials. And it's all about stakeholders coming in prior to citing or developing, so we're not in a reactive mode. And it's well known in the broader community, that's pretty much the successful way to do this kind of stuff. If it's initiated by a city agency, frequently what happens is the city agency approaches the district manager about a need or a site for social service in the district. The district manager, in this case, Jesse, would then set up a briefing by the city agency and or the proposed operator about the need for the facility. And there'd be a whole initial idea, what does this mean? What does it do? Why are we doing it? But those meetings happen with the board leadership, maybe 5 or 6 people maximum, maybe 2 or 3 people maximum, and the district manager. Notes are taken. And then depending upon what it is, it gets referred to an appropriate community board committee. Because sometimes social service or community facilities require land use actions, not just actions of the Housing and Health and Human Services Committee. If there is a need, we then, as a board, will hold public informational meetings to discuss this with the broader public, to let people know what's going on and get those organizations that provider engaged with the broader public and different community organizations. We then come back to the committee, have a discussion about it after hearing input from the public. There's a proposed letter, and the letter gets referred to the full board for full discussion and adoption. And I think the point I want to make here is normally this is a multi-month process that happens before a facility or proposal comes in front of us. That's the standard way we've done business for many, many years.
Can
Yes,
I?
Katie. Yes.
Just to actually clarify before I even ask my question. Did you say that you want us to ask questions during this, or should we wait?
Yes. I want to go through it and ask questions. It's better as we're doing it to be back and forth.
Great. So then I do have a question about this page. So, you know, I'm thinking about our most recent discussion about, you know, at our last
Meeting.
Yeah. And so, for example, I guess I'm wondering, because it's a little hard for me to tell, like when you say initial step, if there's a need. So there's always clearly.
No, if there's a need for the public informational meeting, there's always that initial step.
Okay. But I guess what I mean is I'm trying to figure out which is the chicken and which is the egg. So DHS, I assume, and our community obviously thinks that there's always a need for something to be happening to the many people who seem to be having a variety of struggles and who are spending a lot of time on the street. So I guess what I'm wondering is, would you hope that DHS would come and say, well, we really think that we need more, you know, walk-in, whatever, facilities or something? Or are you saying that if DHS says we really need more of these, and then they see a potential location or two, like, is it when they see a potential location or two that you want them to come to us first, or only just generally to say, hey, we think that there are specific things we'd like to see more of in the district?
I am really happy to hear this question, because this is the key lens we have to shift to in the community board. DHS job and its work is never to come to community board and say, we need some citywide need, we have a broad need, here's what it is. They come to community boards because they are thinking that in our district, there is a need to cite something, right?
Right.
It's all location. So let's say there has been a whole series of, there's been I'm making this up, okay? There's been a spike in women dealing with domestic abuse in Community District 4. And they would come to us and say, you know, we've seen this thing, whatever, and we're really talking to providers. Providers are talking to us about doing a very confidential women's shelter in District 4. How do you feel about that? What do you think? And that is what I'm talking about. That is the normal process our board has been with HRA, DSS, now DHS, all consolidated together. That's the process we would have. And that's where a discussion starts. Because many times these discussions don't proceed for various reasons. There might be an idea, there's a problem with funding, the operators are not good operate, you know, whatever it may be. But that's like the way we normally start something. It's not about we, the city of New York, have a social service need.
No, obviously, yeah. But I guess
but I'm saying this to be explicit to everybody. It's always about locational.
Right, but clearly, like we've clearly in our district, we all know that there are lots of unsheltered people, and there are a variety of needs that need to be addressed. So I guess I'm just wondering, I'm not clear, Joe, if we felt like DHS should have come to us before they even started thinking about a siting, or if when they start thinking about a siting, they should come to us before they even talk about it really with anybody else. That's, I guess.
So I'm going to give you historically what's happened. What's happened is an agency, whether it's DHS, HRA, any of the social service agencies, or the next page will be about individual not-for-profits, right? They would always come to the board first to say, we are considering or thinking about X, Y, or Z. And when I say need, it's in terms of locating it in your district. So
right.
a good example is, it happens, I'm going to stay away from social service for a second, use something else. The Department of Sanitation needed to move a sanitation garage temporarily for rehabilitation of the Williamsburg Bridge, or the Manhattan Bridge. So there was a discussion back and forth about, we want to move this to Community District 4 for this purpose, whatever. And we went back and forth and discussed the pros, the cons, the effects, would that be? And in fact, if this happened, what the community would expect as part of it. Because the whole process is, when something is identified, then immediately our role is to say, this works, doesn't work, wrong location, issues, problems, whatever it is. We give them all the flags. So by the time they make their decision that it's something they want to do, they know what's happening. And our role is to try to bring the agencies through a process to avoid pitfalls. That's been our historic role over and over. Does that help, Katie?
It does. I guess I'm still feel like, though, I'm just not clear. There are two things that happened. DHS felt that there needed to be more drop-in facilities in our district. And this particular piece of real estate became available, and Urban Pathway said, hey, we could do it. And then that happened. So I guess I'm just wondering, did we want, even before a discussion with Urban Pathways or a particular location, did we want DHS to say, hey, by the way, guys, MCB4, we just want you to know that we really think that there need to be more drop-in facilities in MCB4.
Yes, what I'm saying to you is not what we want. That's what would normally have happened outside of this administration.
Joe, I just wanted to add a little.
Dolores, go ahead.
Because Katie, traditionally, we're not part of that initial conversation. The initial conversation. We get brought in when they figured out this is the spot for it. And as Joe outlined, what we hope is to work out what potential problems there would be if it happens. What was different about the pandemic and different about this latter half of this administration was because prior to the pandemic, especially with very visible sightings like out in Queens, the one on 58th Street, a couple of other locations for shelters, communities were so against having them at all. The administration went quiet, and they would just tell us when they were about to close on a deal. That's essentially what happened. So the question that you have about should or shouldn't, I'm not quite sure that it comes up in the conversation right now, because the main thing is that any of these agencies are not responding to our community's direct needs. They're finding an opportunity within our community and responding to the needs of their agency in this particular case, which is different from when we've identified that we have a need or a problem. I think what's broken here in this past few years of this administration is the trust that this community can work with the agencies to get to the right response for whether or not it's appropriate or the operation may work or it needs to be tweaked. So again, I think that we're never in the conversation when an agency is looking to solve a problem. We come in the conversation whenever they say, here's this place. Oh, it happens to be in your district. Now we're going to tell you about it.
And that's very much, Katie, what the board is about, because something gets located and therefore we get consulted and go back and forth and discuss.
And that makes sense to me. Yeah, if they're thinking about citing it in this particular place, that they would come to us. I thought that the way this was drafted earlier, you were saying even before they thought about the citing, they should come to us. But okay, so it sounds like we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now the next page is what happens when it's a provider. So this is
Maria,
more,
did you say wait?
Yeah, Joe, I had
I'm
a question.
sorry. Maria.
I should have jumped in earlier.
Apologize.
Really like in your first slide, it's really for you, Joe, JD, and Dolores, because you have the like knowledge on here on the board. Historically, what was the time frame that DHS or a provider would come to the board? Would it be like 6 months out, 2 months out? You know, now they say I think it's like 60 days notice.
No,
30
it would vary widely. It would depend upon, let's say, the provider. Like a provider is sort of very familiar with our board and the processes and the back and the forth. They would come way in advance to say, we're thinking about doing X, Y, or Z. So that's an example of when we get to it, Flemister House on West 22nd Street between 10th and 11th. That organization came way in advance to us, talked about a location. What do you think? Does this make sense? There's a zoning issue. How do we resolve this? Like they were coming to the board in a collaborative mode, right? Other times we'd have things that were a disaster, where an organization would acquire a building requiring no public approvals at all, and then there'd be huge issues in the building with long-term tenants and stuff like that, and the board would be in a reactive mode to this. So more and more as we worked with this, we would engage with providers saying, come early, talk about it in order to avoid conflict. Jesse?
So Joe.
Oh, sorry. Jesse?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I just think you clearly have produced this PowerPoint, and I think you probably have very good examples. Some of them you might have just said, but I just I would love just to actually give you the moment to get through this, what you're presenting.
No, but I think it's okay to ask questions because part of it is
no. I'm not saying not ask questions. I would like to see. I would like to know exactly what some more examples of, good working examples that we could make future.
That's how this presentation ends, giving like 6 examples of stuff that we've done to give. I think concrete is better to understand.
I think that was my question, Joe, that I was starting to ask you was, can you cite some examples of when we were able to resolve an issue that was brought to us and we gave our input and we said that this particular site or situation was not good for CB4?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to at the end. Perfect.
Okay.
Right. So then the same thing happens here with the provider. And we found frequently we will have providers come to the board more often initially than agencies, because the providers are the ones who have to operate a facility subsequently and want to make sure things go well and understand what the surrounding issues are and where there's going to be both support or opposition. Community considerations. When someone comes to us, we really talk about, is there a need for this service? Because it's not just like service the homeless, it's a specific service or type of thing, whether it be servicing mentally ill individuals, a clinic, a location for people to do needle exchange, whatever it is. What is the need for the service? We also talk then about proximity to other community institutions, such as schools or senior centers, where people may be upset about something being in proximity to it. Then we have a discussion about the track record of the operator in general. Who are they, what they've done, but then specifically track record in the proposed type of facilities. Sometimes operators come to us and they have never operated the kind of facilities that they're proposing. And so we ask them and speak to them about that. We ask for the service plan for the clients, the staffing, what's happening there. And then building operational plans, hours, security, management, staffing, different than the service plan. And then we get to this point about talking about community opposition or acceptance. We really push operators or DHS or whatever the social service agency is to work with local block associations to present and demystify these community facility or community social services. Work with adjacent neighbors regarding security and operational concerns. The physical building. Frequently we have things that may require no land use proposal, but that operator wants to come to us to talk about how it fits into the block. And we talk about design, if it's a new construction, adjacency, where the entrance is to go, need for exterior lighting, loading, unloading, ambulances, whatever. We frequently have proposals that come for partially occupied buildings, and there are existing tenant concerns. So for example, in the Aladdin Hotel, formerly known as the Longacre, that was an SRO that was partially occupied, and there were 15 long-term tenants there. who then all of a sudden were living in a shelter, and the bathrooms were shared and the kitchens were shared. Lots of conflict. We have currently an issue at 440 West 41st Street, the proposed women's shelter for women and children. And in fact, that building has long-term tenants, and now they're having major construction issues and living in an impossible situation. So we engage with that and bring this up to them in advance. And then proximity to other social services and how other types of social services may have poorly operated in the past. And therefore, here are the things to avoid in your operations. Maria and I did that a lot with Care for the Homeless on 52nd Street and talked about specific things that did not work in the locations. And here's how to make it better. And really talked very early on as they talked about it. Maria, can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, I was going to say, and Dolores, I would say I joined more as it already opened. I think Dolores had more conversations right before.
Dolores, sure. Dolores, can you hit in on that?
Sorry. I'm trying to think about what exactly the conversations were, but essentially I
remember.
Okay, so then you go ahead and then get me jump started. I'm having a senior moment.
So it was about providing indoor space. It was about providing places to smoke, providing outdoor space for tenants, like things that we knew were problems in other locations, and then how to staff the security and to do patrols. These were all. So go ahead, Dolores. Now you got it. You're prompted.
Yeah. No, my issue. I think my confusion was we had some folks in the community that don't understand the process of how specifically an agency works and how a provider works. So the confusion was that people were giving input of like, we'll just buy a bench for these people to sit on outside. We'll design this for you, thinking that it didn't have to go through an acquisition process. So, how this worked is creating the cab. We were able to at least try to educate some of those neighbors around about some of the things, but also to talk to the provider itself and explain, hey, these are suggestions which could help us in the community not have to have conflict. And the whole point is again, try to come to that balance of experts, and the experts are the people who provide the services, and people who don't know how the process works. That's the broader community. And those are the liaisons. And that would be folks like us from the community board that understand how to speak that language and bring it together. It's very hard, because most people think it's a very simple solution, but don't understand the complexities of, one, the populations, but they also don't understand the complexity of the process of being able to get any of these things done.
And that is what we offer in discussing and engaging with these providers to come in and talk about. Remember, not everything is a homeless shelter, right? A good example is the Ryan Center, Health Center on 46th and 10th. When they came to us first, they actually said they would have no windows on the street because the neighborhood was so dangerous. Wow. And like 4 members of the committee jumped up from the table saying, how dare you say that about our neighborhood? In fact, we want you to have windows on the street so you can see what's going on and people see you as part of the community. And they put a window in on the street. That is there to say, that big round window. So it gives you an idea of some very simple things that someone coming from outside of the district doesn't understand the needs or the context of the district. So outcomes. In proposed facilities where there's great engagement and then with the neighbors, most are accepted. And after they operate and they operate well, they're embraced. In cases where folks have been direct and open, when there's problems that happen subsequently, they get resolved. They may not happen resolved immediately, but they get resolved. However, where providers have been evasive or untruthful, we have definite problems with resolution after the facility opens. And a good example of that is Lantern on 51st Street, where they were not being clear, they were not being truthful, and they changed the program after it was approved for SRO preservation. It turned into not preserving the housing for low-income, long-term existing tenants, but really bringing a great number of heavily social service needy individuals in that could not be managed in that setting and in that building. Some agencies, after having a discussion with the board, whether it's the briefing stage or the public discussion stage or the community, they just may decide not even to proceed because this may not work for them at all, given the understanding the broader context. So questions so far on this? Anyone? Okay. Now let's go to some case studies, and I call them the good, the bad, and the difficult, right? Because that's exactly what they are. Let's take Timestar Hotel. This takes us back to the early 1990s. This building is not located in our district. It's across the avenue on 8th Avenue. However, Breaking Ground, then known as Common Ground, really wanted the support of our board because we have been very involved in the idea of supportive housing. And this building was very large, 652 apartments. There's a lot of debate on the board whether or not to support it. But because it was being run as a horrible homeless hotel, it was a source of incredible crime. And the board's engaging with Common Ground. We went back and forth to determine how we could support it and what they would do, what kind of service plan and operational plan they would have. And this won our support because it was an incredibly difficult building that created a lot of problems for our district, literally right across the street. And this is considered one of the best run supportive housing buildings in the city and became the model nationwide for a lot of other supportive housing buildings.
When I used to work in the theater, I had a friend who lived in the building and I visited her. It was actually a really nice building. I didn't know at the time. When I visited her, it was supportive housing. Found that out after the fact.
You know, and it was also became the renovation of a historic building. And that brought in investment into the building to make it, because it was so expensive to do. The city took a huge leap on this. And one of the reasons they took the leap is because Community Board 4 was very, very thoughtful and careful about supporting this. Next thing is 347 West 37th Street, Fountainhouse. This is a small tenement mid-block between 8th and 9th Avenues. This building was city-owned. It was so bad, it was partially collapsed inside. And the Economic Development Corporation came to our board and presented an idea to convert it to a jewelry factory. I'm not kidding. Now, there were a number of there were a number of long-term older women on the board. They literally brought, the HRA brought, the EDC brought jewelry to the meeting and talked about what a wonderful jewelry factory this was and convinced the members to support a jewelry factory in a tenement. The project failed and never happened, but the board was very familiar with the location. When the community was successful in negotiating a $25 million fund for affordable housing from the Times Square redevelopment project, we actually went to Fountainhouse and said, here's a location for a building for another Fountainhouse residence. You really manage your buildings well, you deal with this very solidly. What would you consider looking at it? And they did, and they proposed not only a residence, but a 12-bed small shelter for mentally ill individuals. And therefore, this was initiated by the board asking a provider, what can you do? And we supported them on securing the building and supported them on securing a good short portion of the funds to do renovation. And today is a combination of individual supportive housing units, and the second floor is a small 12-bed shelter. And this building has been renovated. That happened in the early 1990s. This building's been renovated twice already since that time. And you would not even know it's there. It blends into the fabric of the block. Next thing, this is 454 West 35th Street. Supportive housing, 55 units. I just closed that. This is a Clinton housing building. And the building was a community problem. It was three buildings with very bad tenant harassment, owned by a school teacher and a pianist who were harassing tenants out. And if you can see that one photo on the left, you see blocked up windows. The building was occupied at that time. And there were multiple fires to get people out. Housing conservation coordinators, the tenant advocacy in our group in our neighborhood, came to Clinton Housing saying, can you do a project or something here for this building? And this, we're looking at the first supportive housing built in our district on West 35th Street between Dyer and 10th Avenues. The accommodation was there were 5 rent control tenants. Those people stayed their life at their rent controlled rents. And the rest of the building was renovated. They were relocated off site temporarily. And it houses 25 units for mentally ill and 25 units for senior citizens, 60% of whom are homeless. And there's a small park built next to it. Because it had so many elements and was the first time there was supportive housing built in our district, this project went through 4 committees of the community board 4 times before it was approved. By the time it came to final approval, it was a unanimous approval with one president not eligible. So that process of really engaging community and people around the surrounding blocks on it, then it was heavily accepted, and it was no longer, it was the first time we had this kind of homeless housing in our district. Next is Bowery residents on the Jack Ryan residents now on 131 West 25th Street. And I know Katie's a member of the board there, but I will say very clearly, this was not an easy thing to happen at all. This was the opposite. The board was not well briefed. Information was flying around. This became one of the most controversial service projects the board has ever dealt with. It culminated in a public informational meeting at FIT, at which 300 people attended, with members of the committee on the stage, Muzzy Rosenblatt speaking on behalf of the proposal. And it was one of the most horrific public meetings the board has ever experienced. People screaming, yelling, cursing. It was poorly managed. And one of the things, and I said candidly, and I know Katie will be aware of this, is that part of it was when questions were asked, they were not answered clearly. When specific things were asked, they were said, we're working on this, we're considering it. So there's a question about security, and they could not answer how many security. It was a classic example of an organization doing the right thing, but not being prepared to deal with the public issue of it. And I would say this became an item the community board dealt with over a period of at least 4 or 5 months. Once it opened, there were issues about the building's operation, and we set up a cab, and there were lots of issues with the block. Jesse, you were there for the whole part of that or not?
I was there for
At the end.
what I said. I was there for what I call round 2.
Right.
So I wasn't there for the initial opening, and I think what I remember is that there was a lot of work done at the very beginning to try to work with the issues that were coming up and create the cab and all of that. Things seemed to be progressing well, and then unfortunately I think processes got stopped or lost or whatever we want to call it, and the issues came back. So
and I will say one of the things that I noticed as a board member, because that initial sense was that things were not accurate, things were not true. One of the biggest things here, and we worked with Councilmember Quinn to get additional funds to put a roof deck in for tenants to have outdoor space, which solved a lot of problems. This was, it persisted in how the neighbors reacted to it. And it was ugly and it was nasty, and the board would get hit over and over about this. It is now settled, it's working through, issues happen, they get resolved, but we lost like about 2 years of good relationship because of that initial presentation.
Joe, I would just,
Sorry.
I know this isn't the point, but I would just add that the challenges there remain, and they are clearly deeply rooted in this fractured foundation with which the relationship of the neighbors and community was built on. And so even things that don't need to be very significant become very significant because there's a significant lack of trust and like deep-seated sense of lack of communication and respect. So it really makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say, and it's very much how the social service providers come in initially, the tone that gets set, and the public back and forth. Like we have project, well, I'll go to another one, for example, here. Here is Christopher House, which is the back portion of the old YMCA on 23rd Street. This was another project by Common Ground. Common Ground came in before they were even considering, they wanted to do this. The Y was up for sale. We had a whole conversation, and it was very much about, could we replicate what happened at the Timestar Hotel and the Prince George Hotel? And now they had done this a few times. And this wonderful historic building, and the Y, which is a major community institution. Remember, it moved to 14th Street. So there was a whole push and pull that here is a problem solver. We have an important building and a location that everyone's connected to. Here's a way to protect and preserve and expand affordable housing at the same time. Similar to what happened on the building on 35th Street, where it was fires and trouble and long-term tenants being really, mishandled. So they came, and there have never been any issues because the tone was established so well. The next one is St. Francis. Now, this was another difficult one. because here is the Franciscan Friars. They established a residence, and there were occupied apartments and SROs, and they didn't talk to people. I went on a tour of this building, and there were open elevator shafts. I mean, I can't even tell you. They started to do construction with total disregard for the long-term tenants, and you have a religious order doing this. That took a number of years to straighten out, and now this is not a problem location anymore. But it was horrific. It was one of the things where, like Jane Wood from Chelsea, long-term advocate, would bring 10, 15 tenants, 25 people to every meeting talking about how horrible people were being treated there by the Friars. So that kind of thing took a long time to settle out. And now you won't even know it's there. Flemister House. This is our first supportive AIDS residence in the district for HIV positive people. And this was a big issue, how to get this to happen. There was an overwhelming need in Chelsea. What do we do? How to make it happen? It's in a manufacturing zone. And because it was filed as a community facility, it was able to be built in the manufacturing zone. This is well prior to the rezoning of West Chelsea. Because the provider worked so closely with the Chelsea community and with the community board, again, this was a unanimous vote at the community, and they restored an historic building on top of it. Now, this was pretty much a wasteland. This was all pre-gallery at that point, but it was a back and forth, and it was heavily, heavily embraced. And I believe that is our layout. So here's our map, as you know. And one of the things we always have to go back and look at as we go forward is talking about what is the proximity, what is the use, what goes next to each other, what kind of residential block, what's happening. And you see this part of the map, which is Northern Health Kitchen. And then you have the middle. But please look what happens when we get south. In Chelsea, there's not a lot of social service siting. So one of the things we have to deal with is how do we properly distribute social service facilities and community facilities throughout the whole district so that it's not all weighted, because this map looks very different than this map. That's the end of the presentation, and I really want to go around the room and get people to talk and ask questions here. Let's start, and I'm going to call on everybody. Let's start with Leslie.
Well, I agree with you that you need to first work with the providers. I think that's really important. And you cited, of course, my favorite topic.
Lantern, yeah.
The fun that we had with them. And, it's important that they service the clients that they have as well as the community. And that was a mixed building, as you cited before. And so we had people in there who were there for many years, who then had the influx of individuals who were creating problems for them.
Heavily social service needy individuals, heavily.
Yeah, and so we had those people who were there prior crying out for help. And these individuals who were brought in there who needed the service were not getting the proper service that they needed. And so that created a problem. And so that's really, really important for us, as you cited, to know the provider, and we need to have a really strong input into the providers and how they work and how they, are responsible for the community. That's really, really critical.
And I want to go back further, though, because people will not remember. The Lantern organization came to us originally to build a supportive housing for homeless vets on West 23rd Street. And the community and the community board embraced the idea. Homeless vets, a group that is not being serviced, let's help them do this. And they ended up losing the site to a property developer for a condo. So 2 years later, when this issue came up of SRO preservation, we said, why don't we approach them to see if they can look around? This is part of SRO preservation. 330, 332 West 51st Street is part of the Western Rail Yards commitments for 150 apartments of SRO preservation. So it was the board that approached Lantern, given the fact of their track record and what they had done before to come to this location. It is a good example of no good deed goes unpunished, okay? We all worked, we thought we had a great provider, and they ended up being a very bad provider and they ran after service dollars at the expense of preserving the long-term residents in that building. So even when there is collaboration, there are still issues and problems. Roberta, you're next on thoughts.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that second part. I think that the frustrating thing about providers, even with decent track records, is almost every single social services provider has had some issue.
Or staff changes, and all of a sudden the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, and so I think the board can certainly try and prevent providers with very bad histories from citing in the district, but I think that it's important to acknowledge that reality. I don't think anyone is, delusional in that respect, but I think it was the mayor who said a month ago that if he took away the contracts from every homeless service provider who had a major scandal, we would not be able to meet our city's need for shelter, which I think is just something kind of to keep in mind that when thinking about this. Overall, I think the criteria make a lot of sense and are positive. I would just add that I think it's important to just affirm that there is, when pushing back on particular sites, that the community is not pushing back on a site in the district or a site in general, and then also that the back and forth is as expedient as the board can possibly go through it. I know that there's a need to get things right, but the more time these processes take, the more both expensive and then the fewer services are provided. So just one piece of that, but I have no meaningful feedback on the actual processing criteria. I do wish it would work that way.
What's really interesting though, what I found is even if it takes longer and you work things out, you end up with a better outcome. And the groups that do that, you don't even know it's there. And that's the best part. It becomes part of the community. I mean, there was a group many years ago in my office that worked with HPD and did a small homeless housing project for families, right, on West 37th and 10th. And the adjacent condo sued to stop the homeless families from coming in. As part of the work we did, we opened a small community center. And within a year and a half, the condo owners were teaching classes to the homeless family children at the community center. Because once you demystify and engage, it just takes the thing away when it's a provider that is going to really operate. The real problem we have sometimes, we use that phrase, when there's a poor provider in one location, it spills over to others. That's always an issue, getting tarred by somebody else. Dolores?
I just wanted to comment on the timing thing. A lot of times the timing isn't delayed by the community board trying to get the community engaged. The timing a lot of times are these agencies that have a mandate that want to go ahead and say that they're going through the process of engaging. So they'll create additional opportunities to speak on it. And they're hoping to either wear us down, get us to change, find maybe at one of our public meetings, a couple of voices that may dissent so that it's enough to move forward. So I don't think that adding the time, the delay is necessarily by engaging in the community process. But I also wanted to point out, I think it really is important if we think about being able to offer the services that these agencies need to offer and to offer them well, working these things out first and early actually saves them money in the long run. Having to respond to some of the pushback that happens in real time because it wasn't thought out or wasn't worked out probably costs these operators a lot more money. So it's not that I recognize what you're saying is that we shouldn't drag things out for the sake of dragging things out, as bureaucracy tends to have that bad rap. But I do think that in this case, our part of our process, we don't want to delay things. We want to get to a conclusion that's positive. And it's not always on us that makes that timeline longer, at least not in my experience. I don't know.
I mean, example, yeah, I always use is that when we have a meeting with a provider, especially residential, we say, where will you have a place outdoor to smoke? Because people are going to smoke. And if they're all smoking in front, it'll create the appearance that it's loitering and hanging out. And just providing a rooftop, a yard, a courtyard, whatever. And a lot of times they say, oh, we never thought of that. I'm like, that's really important in terms of not creating an impression that, so it's that sort of small thing that makes acceptance and engagement better, I think.
I was gonna add something small earlier, yes. But Joe mentioned it. And so at CFH, at the Care for the Homeless on 52nd Street, by the time I got involved, there was outdoor space on the roof for smoking. But something that hadn't been thought of, and it came up during one of the CAB meetings, is there's no place for anyone to sit. Something so simple, right? And nobody thought of it. All right, so let's have tables and chairs for the ladies to sit, right, and chill and relax. So just being creative and coming together as a community, and residents and community board members. The city was there, so it was good. It's helpful.
Joe, I'm sorry. I was responding to Roberta, but I actually wanted to bring up a different point, so I apologize.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I think one of the struggles that we've had in the last year is in us defining where we've had problems and issues has come off as if we don't want to be part of the solution, right? And that's where those of us that have been on the board for a long time struggle, because we can demonstrate how we want to be part of the solution. I think especially with the new administration coming in, what's real important is for us to really advertise where we fit into the process as solution providers. Because one, over the years, those that have been on the board longer than me have identified where we actually have appropriate sites for certain things, right? Whatever that is. If it's affordable housing, et cetera. We are the ones that are being proactive. When something is in the wind that may happen, we're the ones that are proactive to flag if someone else needs to come into the conversation or that we need to go ahead and explore. And I think that somehow we need to just advertise that we provide a resource as another agency of this city for these agencies. And somehow we've lost that clear message because we have not been aligned with our electeds in the last 2 to 3 years. And I don't know whether that comes out of showing the criteria of writing a letter, et cetera, but somehow we need to, as this administration comes in, let them know that's at every point of the new administration that we as an agency, our role is to work with these other agencies to get all these things done.
Sabrina, thoughts?
Well, I have a few thoughts. I do appreciate this presentation and it gives a lot of context. But I do think that our community is evolving and problems are different than they were in some of the circumstances. I mean, we were dealing with a pandemic and we're still dealing with a pandemic, and that, and we're dealing with another pandemic, which is, opioids, and that's a reality, and we have to face that. And so we have to bring into the table to other ways to address that. And that's why, I personally think that the drop-in center, it's a good idea for our district. And yes, it was not the right block because the segregation, but when we say oh, we cannot have this here, we need to come back with a place in mind where we want that to go. We cannot just say no, but I think as a community that we care and have all these thoughtful, insights and know what is best for our community, we should also be proactive in saying you know what, this is not the right place, but I have a right place for you. And
so I really want to respond to that because this is a key thing. Yes. Normally, that's what we would do because the provider or the agency would have come to us months before and said, we need to have this happen here. Or the provider would say, we need to do, this is something we really need. And then we would do a back and a forth well before a letter being sent in August about a site that's going to be acquired. That's the missing part from the process in this administration. It's not the missing part from the board. And when we get things thrown at us, none of us are 100% full-time available to figure out what we do. And that's the thing we've been constantly caught all the time. It's driving me crazy.
I might have a solution. I think we should come up with a working group or something that actually comes out with like the ideal plan or the ideal shelter. I mean, we have to fraction this in different, like, as a supportive housing, as a assisted living, as a drop-in center. I mean, whatever the different services that we have, right? That don't even comes out to me with how would be the best way to do it. What are we looking in these places? What do we want? Like you say, a place to smoke. We need to make sure there's a terrace because they're littering outside. It's a drop-in center. Well, guess what? There has to be security outside to make sure people are not lingering outside. It's in and out. And in those drop-in centers, what are we going to offer? Are we going to have, substance use control like MIT? Are we going to offer those? How are we going to think about this? Are we going to have social workers? Are we going, all these nuances that are so important. And now we're learning that we need to incorporate in social services. And this is what, in my view, this is what is lacking of. We need to come up and be proactive. And this is not going to be something that's going to be resolved tomorrow, but like, okay, here, this is what we're doing. This is the check. So that's all our ideas.
Maria and I talked about this half an hour ago.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I feel like you're like a put up on this thing.
But guys, these agencies have guidelines for And I like the idea, Sabrina, of a working group, but the working group should understand what those guidelines are. And just like we have for BLP, there's broad guidelines, but then we also ask for additional. And just like the affordable housing plan that outlines exactly where there are sites. And there's a minimum that is already baked in, but we ask. So Sabrina, that's a great idea, which would take the what's already required and say, okay, that's great for the generic neighborhood, the additional needs that we have, and our experience shows that you also may want to think about X, Y, and Z.
Outdoor space, smoking.
However, I do think, Sabrina, it's really hard for us to identify spots because even if we know what the criteria of an agency for a particular need is, how they can acquire a property or what the budget is, things like that, we may not be privy, and we may say, oh, this is a great building because this building hasn't had anything done in it, which
provide options, like, I don't know, a few of them, and a few of them.
Right, we can also say things like, don't put it in this part, like certain parts of the district cannot take any more, look in these parts. We can give them general ideas as to where things go, because our goal is to avoid oversaturation and concentration. So things fit in and don't just be sticking out, right? But I can't tell you, Sabrina, Maria and I just talked about this, that we should do a similar sort of like, when you come to us, social service provider, give us the list of all these things, like the service plan, the operation, the smoke, like all these things, go through it. So we're not dragging it out of you, but you're offering it to us so we can evaluate and understand it up front.
And it's even good for us because now going back to, like, I was a BLP a member, and at the beginning I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I had that check, and then like, okay, and then like you said, there were things in the community that worked better that I learned that it's not universal. It was just in our community, like particular things that members would ask, and then it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense because of this, or that doesn't. It's like that even for as a record, right? Because guess what? We also have another issue. We have term controls. What controls, like
term limits.
Thank you. Term limits. So the historic of the institution sadly is going to go away. So we need to provide documents and processes that will enable those to continue to move forward and make sure that we can serve our best to our community. Right.
I swear by God, I wrote a script for you and you said it. This is fantastic.
We're connected. Yeah, that's are my thoughts. Like I said, I've been really thinking about this. So yeah.
Pete Diaz.
Thank you for letting me have my 2 cents in here. Given that I've had the experience in dealing with the provider or providers,
The personal experience in your home.
which has been nightmare. My question is as to, and it's important that the board understand, as to who approached whom first. Was it the landlord that approached the provider, or the provider approached the landlord to have facilities located within our community? And I say so, I'm asking because I sometimes wonder the intent of the landlord, because he seems to benefit in the long run. In my case, yeah.
Yeah. So this is an example that our board struggled with, and we dealt with this for almost a year. That the owner of Travelers Inn on 39th and 8th, also 39th and 8th Avenue, also owns the building Pete lives in at 300 West 48th. There was an SRO, there were vacant rooms there, and the owner of that building, without question, approached Urban Pathways, who operates Travelers Inn, to say, we could rent you some rooms. Urban Pathways had a social service need for various clients and basically rented a block of rooms. Now, the issue here is that was not thought through at all, is people with high social service needs were now sharing bathrooms with people who don't have high social service needs. And there was no on-site social services. And there still actually isn't. But it was a mismatch, and it was an opportunistic thing, just like Deputy Commissioner Molly Park mentioned to us about, being in the real estate business. That's not what DHS should be doing. I will say that in most cases, providers will come to say they are searching for something. They're aware of working with an agency that there's some funding stream that may or may not be available. So therefore, they're going out and looking for some sort of building or location to locate the community facility of the social service facility. And then DHS works with them. What really happens is the smart providers always come and talk first, so we don't end up with a situation we had in Pete's building, where it became a huge issue and we had to go through and step by step resolve it. So Jesse, you were involved for that. Could you explain that a little bit and the process that we did?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the meetings we had with
Urban Pathways, yeah.
Sure. I mean, yeah. So we would. That was a unique scenario because the main facility was outside of our district. The what they call the annex was in, which was when Pete's building was news to us, right? I mean, it wasn't something that was announced.
No notice, nothing just happened.
Right, and nothing discussed by the agency. I don't know if even the agency knew it. So it was news to almost everybody at the table, except for Pete and Urban Pathways. And so, there were some unfortunate incidents of clients really decompensating and having some real psychological breaks and extremely armed police officers having to show up. Real damage to the communal spaces and the egresses to the stairs due to clients. Pete was there, but clients throwing out all of their furniture down the stairs to block the police and block anybody from interceding. But I think Joe hit on the key part there, which was, I don't think the whole plan, I don't think was a great plan, but there was no on-site services. That's, I think, that's the kind of thing where that's a huge red flag, right? You're going to create that, you're going to fulfill that need, but not provide the services is really putting everybody in a really tough situation and possibly dangerous.
There were guns pulled in the building.
Yeah,
guns.
Yeah. So
it's horrible.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it was. Since I'm speaking, do you mind if I just say a couple things, Joe?
Right in. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I've been listening, and I think everything everybody's saying is spot on. I would, from my experience, I'll say two things. One, I think, and you touched on it too, Joe, is staff changes. And I think we as the board have to remind ourselves sometimes, and then remind the community that while the community maybe is like a block association has been there for years and generations, that this is an organization. It's not a family. It's not even a property owner. So there will be those shifts, those changes, and there will be loss of institutional knowledge, and we'll have to take a step backwards, take 2 steps forwards. And I look at BRC as a little bit of what's going on at BRC right now, is that I think we were in a really good place, and we ended up, unfortunately, due to many reasons. I mean, COVID obviously is affected everybody, but that kind of thing. And so I think that's going to be part of this relationship going forward, even with the best providers. I think there's got to be an understanding and a little bit of that from the board's perspective, and also, but I think,
and from the broader community too.
Oh, in the broader community. But I think that the thing that's become really unique recently is this. We have time and time again, we've been, I think on this committee and on the land use committee, have heard providers basically imply or say straight out that they were told not to communicate with the community until the agency told them it was okay to do so, or with the agency.
Very odd, very not.
So I don't know if that's going to change with the new administration. Who knows? Because agencies don't necessarily just flip all of a sudden because a new mayor's in town. But I think we can do what I think, and what Sabrina was talking about a little bit, was that, being proactive in our outreach. We have great relationships with a lot of providers. And I think maybe making a point of somehow keeping in touch with them, not only in waiting till some facility shows up or some proposal shows up, or even an idea of one, but that we continue those relationships. And that really is going to help the providers feeling comfortable in talking with us. Because I think the minute they get into a deal with an agency about a certain location, with a certain contract, with a certain amount of money, it becomes it becomes all sort of very conservative. But I think if we're having that free-flowing conversation, on a regular basis, they know us, we know them, I think that helps really build that relationship, and them coming to us, and them feeling more confident about coming to us early on, especially if we do have an administration or kind of a messaging from agencies that they don't talk to the community before, we get it all wrapped up and sealed, because that's certainly just not the way we want to do it. It's every time that's happened, we're like Dolores has said, you're unpacking, you're spending months unpacking, you're spending thousands of dollars of their programming time and staffing and whatever, to unpacking all of this, stuff that could have been built properly and thought of constructively together. So that's just my only thought. That's a little more work on our end, I think, but it's fruitful. It's a fruitful work. It's not always seeing the provider on the other side of the table. It's having a conversation with them and just hearing what they're doing and what their ideas are and things like that. So,
JD?
I just want to ask if we can accelerate term limits. I'd be very appreciative of that. I just want to, one word which I think is entirely lost in this conversation is the word community. I'm on this board to represent my community, to take back to the board what my block associations, the people I know, the precinct councils, all my neighbors are thinking. My job is not to work for DHS. In fact, I don't trust DHS to be really concerned about our problems. As I recall at that meeting about the drop-in center, the reason that spot was chosen was because it was available. It was opportunistic. That's what the commissioner said, or assistant commissioner. This was not to help our community. In my 20 or 30 years with this community, I have never heard anybody say, we need more drop-in centers, we need more social service agencies, we need more homeless shelters. What I hear people say is, how can we manage them? When a proposal comes to my block association, our first thought is, great, How can we work together? How can you become part of this community? Will you come to our block meetings so we can solve problems? That's what we should be doing. I think Leslie touched on that. Where's the community in this? The city is going to make its judgments on how to take care of these problems that have existed since the Dutch were here. My job, as I see it, is not to solve those problems. My job is to make my community function as best it can. That's my job, not to make these big decisions, where to put something somewhere. Well, shouldn't we talk to the people first that are going to live around there, get them engaged, as I think some people have said? Where is the community in all this? So that's
our discussion.
Joe,
that's our discussion tonight.
What's that?
That's our discussion tonight, really.
Well, I'd like to hear a little more of that rather than, you know, we should be careful about DHS and why are we talking to them? And, you know, I don't, we should do this.
I think it's important.
Community board members. We're not decision makers. I don't think we are the decision makers about this. I think we should
go to Betty. Go to Betty next. Betty.
Yeah, this is, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate that. I did have a fantasy that a smaller version of this presentation should be given to the city agencies that we interact with so that they understand what we think would be a really good process. I liked Sabrina and other people's ideas about getting a broad picture of how we can be proactive. I like that. I also was thinking about, I think it was before I came on the board, the BRC facility in Chelsea, because it's not too far from where I live. And as I recall, these big headlines were in our local papers about how many, was a very large number of people guys who were going to be housed in this facility. And it was a big brouhaha. And then I guess I was wondering, since I wasn't on the board then, did the community board have an influence on the number of people that were put in BRC?
JD, you have to have to mute. We're getting feedback from you. We in the end we did not, because there was a lot of push to make this thing happen. But really what went on is that it was unclear about the types of programs that was happening. Remember, not everybody's living there. There's a lot of service happening there also. But I will say that because, again, the way in which that tone was established, it took years to repair the relationship. And as Jessica noted, it still carries on with this because there was a focus on service, the service first and the community second. And that was no balance. That was our issue we were dealing with.
So as I recall, Christine Quinn was very supportive of the board, which was saying the number is too large.
Yes, that was what I was reading in the papers. Yeah,
that's correct. We had always stated that we are fine with it, but the size was not
had to be reduced, right?
For the block.
But that was not, the number was never modified. Is that right?
Correct.
I mean, Betty, because in this process, you win some and you lose some all the time. That's what happens.
Right.
I'm going to go to people who haven't spoken first and come back to the others. Katie?
Sorry. Yeah, so I have lots of thoughts. But I think one of the main points that has been discussed this evening about sort of the importance of sort of communication is an important one. And in fact, we just saw an example of it, not in this district, but as we were noting, I recently joined, or a couple of years ago, joined the BRC board after the headquarters was opened. So I wasn't involved there. But we actually, BRC was thinking about acquiring a new site. And then we actually discovered that at that location, that it was a burial ground. And so we stopped, or BRC stopped, and actually got a lot of advisors involved and the community board up there. But and there were a lot of public meetings and frankly about whether or not a facility should be built on property that had been burial grounds. And so it was really interesting to see how many people attended these various meetings that were called. And it was great to see just how many different viewpoints there were and how many different groups got involved, and now how it's been developed. And indeed, that particular site got a lot of support, and now it is going forward, but there is actually going to be a memorial there. And anyway, so it was really interesting to sort of see, and the community board was involved, everybody was involved. And so as you're saying, like, it's really important that community's involved. I also just actually really wanted to say, this might seem slightly off the topic, I thought that the forum that Maria called recently, or sort of helped organize with CB5, was awesome. It just got so much great information. But one of the things that we heard there was that the providers and others, everybody was saying, like, people aren't going to move away or go to a location that's, you know, in a different borough for if they're offered housing or supportive services in a different borough. They're going to stay where they're comfortable. They're going to stay where they feel like they have connections. And so it was interesting to me, Joe, when you were showing the map and saying, well, as you can see, we have some social services up here, so we should really focus down here. I do think, like, absolutely, we have to be careful to avoid oversaturation within a block or two. But to think like, well, because we already have some around Times Square, now all the rest should be down in whatever, Chelsea. The point is, like, and indeed what we hear from our community members is there are lots of people in Times Square that clearly need a place and they need social services. So to say, like, well, we don't want them there, but we don't want the services there. I think what we heard from the service providers at the forum hosted by Maria was that you got to provide the services where the people are. You can't provide them somewhere else.
I have to tell you, honestly, doing this work, part of my work for a living, frequently when people apply for supportive housing and get referred from DHS for supportive housing, if they are from Queens or they are from the Bronx, they frequently want to go to the neighborhoods that they are familiar with, and that's where their connections are. So I think
absolutely, I totally agree. It's about where their connections are. But I think what we're seeing is that there are a lot of people whose connections are in a very concentrated area in our district. And so
I'm going to dispute that. I'm going to say there's a lot of people here, and it's really important to connect with that we don't, for a reason, for example, we don't use welfare hotels anymore, right? And those were concentrated in our district because they didn't work as a model, right? The idea, no matter what we don't do urban renewal and demolish entire neighborhoods to say that's the thing to do. We don't concentrate all the lowest income people in one district and the highest income people in someplace else. So we realized in the same way, out of a desire to assist and help and pull the social fabric back together, everything we do has to create balance. Otherwise, we get this incredible reaction in the other direction.
Right.
And
I think we just have to think about what our definition of balance is. Our definition of balance can't be that Staten Island should have the exact same number of social services as you know, CB4. It's just.
But I'm thinking that in CB4, we should seek to have the social services distributed throughout the district in a way that, in fact, we all share both the benefit and the burden, like everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to, as the providers said during the thing, that like we just have to be aware that, you know, people are going to be congregating in certain areas, and so if we can get them services there, as opposed to like, well, if you just.
But I want to challenge you on this, Katie, and this is an important point.
Yeah.
Our goal is community.
Yes.
Our goal is not just providing services. Community is multiple parts of the neighborhood. There's the people who need it the most, and the people who just want to get up and go to work every day or walk their kids to school.
100%.
That's the balance you must remember.
Yeah, and
okay?
I guess And I agree. And I think that's just the thing I'm thinking about, right? And this also goes to JD's point. So JD, you were saying like, we need to listen to what our community members are saying, right? Like our community members don't want people yelling crazy out on the streets, right? Not that we can control how people are yelling out on the street sometimes, but because like it's helpful to our community members if we can make sure that people who need social services are getting the social services where they need them, such that they're not out in the streets harassing our community members, right? And so it is very much trying to meet the needs of our community members by making our communities livable, is to make sure that anybody who has special needs and who would otherwise be really disruptive is getting the social services they need.
From this community, Katie, or from everywhere?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Well, you're right, if it was from this community, but that's not the way it works, is it?
What do you mean?
Well, social service providers take care of everybody. If you're homeless in Queens and there's a home here for you, you move here. This is not right.
No, I mean, you're not going to be, they try and situate people near where their connections are.
Right. I think the most important part is that every individual is connected with, or not connected with medical and various services and things that I will say, honestly, I have seen people come to supportive housing in Manhattan desperate to leave because in fact, they were from Rockaway and their entire social network is in Rockaway.
Right.
And that idea that we are merely, because there's a need here, we're the repository for everything, that's what I want to be careful of. I want to go to Jessica next, who hasn't spoken yet. Come back.
Thank you. I really like the idea of having clear guidelines that we can review applicants with and have these discussions. I think that would be incredibly helpful. I also, I think I'm agreeing with JD, although I don't want to recharacterize what he said, but I don't think we should be doing the job of site selection or understand, like, for all the complexities that I think it was Dolores who mentioned, but even just more broadly, like, we are advisors, and so we know what about our community, what will work for, like, it is up to these departments to present to us what their goals or intentions are, and then for us to provide a reaction and reflection for why that can or cannot work, or other things we know about our community that might support their decision making or the implementation of their plan. I think it would be foolish to start going building by building and saying this site could be a good place for XYZ. I think that's not our role. And I agree with Jesse's point. I mean, I think building these relationships, there's always turnover regardless of a new administration, but to say, this is really how we want to, these are the resources we have, like the maps, Joe, that you presented. Actually, I'm hoping you can send those. I don't think they're in the drop. Are they in the Dropbox?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I will check them out there. But things like that are really amazing tools that I think do make sense, because they're district specific, they're community specific, and that's how we look. Whereas everyone else is looking at the city, we're looking at our district. And I think building those relationships, and I would love to be part of that process or those discussions where we help create greater understanding about the challenges we're seeing and also the opportunities we think that exist within our district to help advance some of these topics.
Because, maybe there's an ability for us to set that working group idea that certain social service providers come and report quarterly or something, either to this committee or the working group, so that relationship is fostered constantly. And therefore, if they're thinking about something, they can tell us about it up front, because they shouldn't get wooed by promise of a contract or funds or a building from a city agency. Because when you're driven like that, you don't end up in a successful position. You end up just in sort of the next thing. But also, what I do want to note, though, Jessica, is in the case where we've been trying to solve community problems, we have a terrible building where there's some issue. That's a good thing for the board to bring to the provider's attention, to say, we have a problem we're trying to solve. Can you and your program or your affordable housing or supportive housing help solve our problem to protect people and protect the neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean and I don't want to be defeatist, but I feel like we've all on this committee and across the board have had experiences with representatives from DHS where like we just
not DHS. I'm talking about the providers, not DHS.
Okay.
I'm talking like the not-for-profits to say to BRC, for example, we have this horrible thing going on there. Or what was the residence, Jesse, that was being sold on 24th Street? The French,
church, the women's, yeah.
The French residents that we had a meeting with.
Oh, yes.
The sisters, right? So there was a long-term women's residence.
Sisters on 24th Street, but yes, that's what.
A long-term women's residence, and we said this location would be excellent for supportive housing. It's set up as a women's residence. It's a historic building. It's beautiful, and we contacted a number of organizations saying, "Would you be interested in looking at this so it stays affordable as opposed to becoming, some little luxury condo kind of thing?" We did that. We did a lot. Go to people who have their hands up, and Roberta, and then Jesse.
Okay, sorry. I did want to kind of pick up on where Katie and JD left off in terms of the discussion of community. I'm kind of wondering if community is not simply people who live here, who have housing, who are involved in their block associations and are long-term residents, but community may also include people who have lived here for even a short period of time unsheltered, and that figuring out a way to understand or better understand feedback from people who are never going to or very unlikely to come before a board and have free time to offer their feedback may be worthwhile. And considering, who is the community is not just people who are housed, it's also people who aren't, maybe working with providers, doing street outreach, like I think it's Goddard and Project Renewal do them in this community district, and maybe working with them to figure out how do we get feedback from people who are unsheltered, how do we bring that to people and that into future discussions of the siting of different services, not just supportive housing, but also medical services, drop-in centers, and otherwise. And that feedback may be valuable.
Yeah, I think we need to rely upon the providers to give that information to us, because normally the people who are homeless have so many issues they're dealing with on a daily basis. We're not going to get that in a necessarily clear or coherent way. The providers having a relationship with individuals are going to be able to say to us, we really seriously need to deal with people who have multiple addictions, whatever the hell it may be. I'm making this up, whatever it may be, because they're the filter for us to understand what is the need, right? And it's putting too much on individuals who have so much trouble in their lives right now that, they're not.
I wouldn't suppose that, but I think the feedback needs to come from somewhere, and I think the provider is the place that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Roberta, I do like what you're saying, but I was thinking exactly the same thing that Joe was thinking, just thinking about people who are unsheltered, and it makes sense that it would be the providers that we do have relationships with. The other thing, Joe, I think you're
a little louder, Maria.
I think you're going around a second time with some folks, so I just wanted to add my thoughts about the presentation you gave. I thought it was really helpful for me also because I still feel like a newbie as co-chair, even though it's been, I think, like 3 years. 3 years, I don't remember exactly at this point. But, and most of my experience really is around CFH and Lantern. And I see how well things can work when there's community involvement, but it takes time. I also noted that I wanted to mention, I was going to talk about it in new and old business, but and then I wrote it as a note to talk about now. It's actually, I think we should have a standardized document. Thank you, Sabrina. You read my mind. Joe before this meeting. Hey, Joe, BLP has this document. We're talking about one for affordable housing. I think we really need one for human service and social service organizations in this community, I attend a lot of meetings and I find I'm asking the same kinds of questions of everyone. And before a facility opens, there are certain things that are helpful not only to permanent community residents, but to the residents of whatever facility that we're talking about, right? So I would like us to work on that. So if that means having a, what's the word? Working group?
Working group, yeah.
Working on that. The other thing I was going to say is that also I do actually agree with Roberta's saying regarding community, but I also agree with JD. And one thing I have to share though, JD, I'm just going to be frank, is that sometimes I think, and this is for everybody, I think that sometimes when JD is speaking, you don't understand how much he actually cares, right? And so it was because of you, JD, that we have this CB4 community needs assessment that was done. That took that took a couple of months. We had some outside people work on it, and it's really helpful. And we found out about groups that are in the community that are vulnerable and ways in which we can improve our community, right? That we've even mentioned in our budget priorities when we're going through that whole process. And I'm not sure what else I want to add, except that I think this is a really useful and helpful conversation. And I hope that moving forward, I guess I would share that sometimes the discussions that we're having at full board, I think are really more appropriate to have here between us in this committee, right? When we're disagreeing about a letter or we want to add something to a letter. And all of your thoughts and all of your opinions is relevant and important. And because of you, our letters are better, right? So it is important that we share here and we talk here and get it out of the way. And you all know that I'm also available to have conversations outside of this space.
So we're going to go to Dolores and then end with Jesse on this topic.
We had Leslie's hand up first, so I'm gonna.
Oh, sorry, Leslie. I didn't see your hand. It's covered.
No,
no problem.
It's beige.
It's because of the.
It's a brown hand.
No, but it's like a lamp. I thought it was part of the lampshade.
No, I wanted to echo the discussion about maybe regularizing meetings with the providers. I think maybe once a quarter, we should bring all the providers, the senior leaders, that is, of the providers into a meeting with the board to discuss general issues in the community in CB4. Mm-hmm. I think we should kind of regularize that so that it's normal and they all know that this is coming and there are issues that we want to discuss and get their contributions to the community.
I think this is, out of this meeting, this is a great idea that's come out. Dolores and then Jesse.
I just wanted to comment because I think it's real important when we talk about community is we must remember, especially in the northern part of the community, Hell's Kitchen, we are transient. We have Port Authority. We have Penn Station. We have Columbus Circle. These are huge transportation hubs, which bring people in and out of our district that don't necessarily have any connection to our community at all. And a good number pre-pandemic and during pandemic of the folks that are having a lot of social services issues, they're in these transit hubs. They're in Times Square. They're in these places where there's an easy access because of transportation. That's not to mean that we should not be concerned about providing services, but I think it's real important to remember that a lot of the issues that we've been having have been folks that have come outside of our community into this community. And for those of us that have been here forever, like my entire life, 50 something years, we have our unhoused that are part of our community that we know. They're folks that we see every day. They're folks that we talk to. You need a coffee, blah, blah. That's part of the community. When it's someone who's come off of a bus from New Jersey, who's coming in to take advantage of that, being able to congregate in an area where there's more accessibility for whatever it is, and they're breaking down in our community, That's probably why we have service providers that are saying, well, we know that this is happening here. Of course it's happening here. We are attractive for a lot of reasons for many people, whether it's commuters, whether it's theater goers, whether it's folks that are looking to party, whatever it is. But we can't assume that all of the unhoused that are in the community are part of our community. And I just wanted to point that out because we are a transportation hub, which means we are attracting a lot of people here that may end up having a breakdown here, or they may have a conflict here. Are they part of my community? I'm going to disagree, Roberta, that they're not part of my community. Doesn't mean they don't need services, but it means that that should not be the focus point, in my opinion, of being able to be a cohesive community that functions well and provides for those that live, work, well, commute is the same as work, commute here. It's very different from someone who pops in and then has an issue that happens here. That to me is not community.
So let's go to Jesse, end us on this thing, and then we'll definitely, we're gonna refine this presentation so it has some of the stuff I spoke about, put it on our website, and then make sure all this information gets out so it's available to everybody. Yes, Jesse.
I want two things. I think most of it said. A huge learning experience for me was when we had the temporary shelters, and me and Maria predominantly were helped organize a monthly, basically cab with 9 to 10 completely new providers, like folks that we have never dealt with before. We didn't know them from anything. We had no history with any of them, I don't think. Well, that's not true. I'm sorry. There's ones in our district, but that were that were running temporary hotels prior to COVID, but we didn't necessarily have a
deep relationship.
A deep relationship. They didn't run a permanent shelter. But nonetheless, the point being is that experience showed me a couple things. One, right, you could see just the variety of providers and their ability to do what they needed to do, both for their clients and for the community. And we had some that were very good. They got it, right? They just understood what was needed in the situation. They were able to make it work. And others had had to struggle. It was a real struggle to get them there. But will say, and I think this goes to Leslie's point too. I think another benefit of doing those types of all group in things, and I realize, and I learned this with that, is that it raises everybody up. The really good providers are there talking.
They model.
They model without having to model. We don't have to browbeat other providers because they're not doing what we want them to do. It raises the entire baseline of what's being done in the community. So I think that's a real benefit. And the other point I'll just say, I'm weary of us going in the direction of saying, here's some good, there's the good providers, and here's the providers we don't want to deal with. Because I think part of this is we do have to recognize we're gonna have those providers that we're gonna have to help. I always say this: cabs and CACs are not just one-way streets. They're not just for the provider to kind of educate the public about what they do and sit there about mission statements and things like that. It is our job to have to somehow, somewhat teach them, unlearn them about that is not what the cab is about, what the community is about. No one's questioning their mission. No one's questioning this, but
it's about where are people going to smoke.
Right.
That basic level crazy stuff.
Well, yeah, exactly. But it's a mindset shift, right? It's a mindset shift. And so I got to say, I just don't, and I love us to think that all the providers are going to be just ready to go, right out of the box. I think I think some of the best relationships we've gained is from providers that we've spent the time to better. And I think they would say that this is a much better relationship now. Right. And a much better situation for them. So that's the last two things I just wanted to say. And it's 8:15 and you've got 2 more.
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, thanks. But this discussion was well overdue to have. I think everyone, am I getting a nod? This was a good thing to do tonight in general? Right, and engage. So at 8:15, I have a question for the committee members. Do we want to look at the inclusionary housing, or are you just too tired? Up to you. I mean that sincerely.
You know what, again, it's not going away. I don't know that there's any critical reason to look at it. I do want to point out, even though he just stepped out of the picture, if you all note in the actual letter that J.D. Nolan was chair at the time that original letter was written. But I don't know that, I mean, I would like to be able to spend a lot of time talking about this. I don't want to rush it because it's 8:15. I don't know how anyone else thinks, because I think this is
so what I'd like to do then is do one thing. Let's look at the policy that we looked at last month. Look at that. There's very little to look at again. I'll put up on the screen right now, okay? And because I did realize there was one thing we had missed. Okay, can everyone see the policy? Is that large enough? Is the print large enough? Should I make it larger? I can make it larger.
Yeah, can you make it that we don't have to see the, yeah, that's better.
Is that okay, Katie?
Yeah, can you just like raise it up a little bit? Because I'm seeing like a lot of your, styles and editing and stuff.
Well, it's in Word. It's not a PDF. That's the problem.
Oh, I got it. Okay.
So again, to remind everybody, this policy was adopted in 2008, and the items we're talking about are in the bottom, right? Which are additional items, right? So it's only these items right here that are underlined. Everyone can look at them. So specifically, our policy in 2008 was prior to the city's coming up with a specific criteria saying the affordable unit should be in just 65% of the floors. So therefore, we had not commented on that. In most developments that come to us, we seek to have them in as many floors as possible, at least 80%, and sometimes 100% of the floors. The next thing is the apartment finishes, because we had not dealt with that in 2008 to the degree we've dealt with it now. And we said in every meeting we've had, no discrimination to have the finishes be equal between market rate and affordable units. And then the thing that I just put into, because I realized we talked about a lot in our last one, was to assure all building amenities are available to both market rate and affordable tenants with no fee, except for a gym or health club, because that's been something we've said that's something you don't have to have. It is really personally galling to me that when there's a party room or there is a outdoor terrace on a higher floor, you have to pay a fee to use that, and your neighbors are able to use that, but you can't afford it, so you can't use it. That's discrimination. So I think we need to put this in our policy as a signifier to the developers who are coming in. We don't expect that. For the health club, there should be some sliding scale, but for everything else, everyone should have access to it. So I'd like to have a discussion about these 3 items that are really amending the policy. JD? Yes.
Yeah, and the second bullet about furnishes, I think we also need to talk about fixtures as well.
Oh, finishes and fixtures. Got it. Yes. Meaning not light fixtures, meaning like sinks and stoves and things like that.
Exactly.
Right.
Joe, you'll put a sliding this. Oh, you already did. Never mind.
So I'm going to add in finishes, fixtures, and appliances, so it's clear. Thoughts, Katie?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the third one. Not that I can specify exactly. I feel like that there are other things, not just the gym or health club use, that some buildings are doing that they might say, well, there are costs associated with this. So wouldn't we want to say?
But my answer is too bad. Like, if it's a party room, everyone should have access to it. You should have to pay for a party room.
Right. I mean, again, I don't know anything about party rooms, but if it's a party room set up, and that people are serving, then
Oh, no, no.
Presumably, there's some cost associated to the building of providing the service.
No,
That's all.
there actually isn't. In the Gotham one, it really was the room on the top was built in a way you had to go through it to get to the outdoor space. So we need to say to them in our general information, you should have access in general. It should not be, you can't afford that fee, therefore you can't get to an outdoor space. That to me is so discriminatory.
Yeah, that I agree with. I guess I would say, I mean, I just sort of feel like maybe there's some language here that we could say like, you know, all outdoor space should be accessible by everybody who lives in the building, right?
That's good. Yep.
With no fees. And
all communal outdoor space.
Right.
Oh, that's a good point. Right. Like, I guess if somebody has some terrace, you can't walk to their apartment to get to it. That's fair enough. Yes. So all communal outdoor space. Yeah, I guess I'm just, yeah.
I mean, can I jump in? Well, I think I don't know if I'm understanding what Katie's concern is. I do agree. Like, I think there might be other things that they do charge for, right? I mean, so if one, you know, I think about one situation, if the whole building is rentals and there's market rate or luxury rentals mixed with affordable housing rentals, you know, and they charge a fee to use the party room, whether you're whichever one group, right? I mean, I think we can say that everything that's being charged, something like that, should have a sliding scale. Similarly,
exactly. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Trying to say, Katie? Right.
Yeah.
So I mean,
yeah,
I will say it's what the flip is when I know we've dealt with this, not here per se, but when I worked for Gail, is
Gail's office. Yeah.
When you have a mixed ownership situation where it's condoed out, where there might be ownership, where there's like condo units, so therefore they're buying into this concept, into this package where they get part of what they're buying into is this amenity mixed with rental units or even maybe ownership units that somehow the developer doesn't, you know, want to give those units. And so I think that's a different issue, but you know, that's unique. But I think anything that I understand what Katie's going for, which is, you know, if they're charging everybody, there needs to be a sliding scale for the affordable, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. I just want to make sure that anytime that there's a sliding scale, if there is a payment due, there should at least be a sliding scale on that payment due. That's all.
Got it. So, and I think the thing that I want to bring to everyone's attention, what infuriates me over and over, frequently this is all about rooms or outdoor space at the top of buildings.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Those spaces don't exist except for a bonus derived directly from the affordable housing. That's why they're so high. Mm-hmm. And the people who are in affordable units should have the same benefit to get to those spaces because they would not be there except for those affordable units. And that's like a missing piece in this. Like, oh, our market rate tenants deserve a little better. That's discriminatory. I mean, we had one developer come to us years ago who said, well, the doors will all be the same, but you know, behind the doors, they'll have the vinyl tile floors and the cheap, he actually said, and the cheap appliances. Could you imagine, Katie, sitting in a room with that? So
just on appliances, I just want to note, and I apologize, I'm going to have to jump in a second, but that like the language that was just proposed is actually inconsistent with the discussion that we had at the last meeting, which was around, and I know, Joe, you felt like the fashion right now around panel, but like that is the fashion, like that is a thing. And I like, we excused it before in the last discussion because it felt like maybe it's not, you know, the only way to make it nice, but like, I don't know, just if we're saying it needs to be the same, then it needs to be the same. Or if we're just saying it needs to be sufficiently nice, I don't know, that feels like we're opening ourselves up to something.
I agree. And I think this helps us going forward to say the same is the same, Jessica. That's the idea. You know?
Okay. I just want to point out, like, I just want us to be able to use this and be able to defend ourselves with those decisions. Great. Cool. Panels for everybody.
How do people feel about these three items? Again, we we will make the further changes and discuss them again in December.
JD had his hand up, and then I had.
I didn't see it, sorry.
Joe,
go ahead.
the first bullet, this may be picayune, but the distribution through the entire building, all the floors is important. But it's also important where those apartments are located on the floors. In other words,
in terms of exposure, right? Exposure.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah, exposures are the whole, or what line, not all the same line type of thing. I'm actually just want to push back a little bit on being too prescriptive. You know, just picking up on Katie's point about there may be some fees. I think it's real important to provide guidance for developers to note that there should be no separation of those communal spaces, as I think Jessica had thrown out communal spaces. But I think being prescriptive on things that we may not know what is charged, and I think that's what Katie was getting at. Maybe parking is something that is included, and I really don't think that we should get into saying, well, somebody bought a unit and they get a parking space. Well, now you have to offer a free parking space to a rental. So I think the language should be a little bit more broad, saying we need to ensure that all communal spaces are free and accessible to all tenants. And for those items that do require a charge, that we always ensure that there is an appropriate sliding scale for those types of amenities.
You know what we can do? I think we can call out some of these things, such as, because basically everything we talk about now is something that is staffed: parking, gym, health club, pool. So we know that that's more expensive because it costs to run it, but it doesn't cost anything to run an outdoor terrace that is not absorbed in the broader building. So it's that sort of thing to say flat out, like, let's just stop this. So, you know, I'll give another go at this, but this is in the right direction. If I can get a nod from people on that.
Another word that you choose would be like recreational amenities. Now that developments are becoming more and more amenity, bowling,
right,
whatever.
Can I just?
Yes, go ahead.
Just say on the last bullet, maybe you covered this and I didn't catch it. Ensure all building amenities are available to both market rate and affordable housing tenants with no fee except. So, okay, so there's a room. I'm speaking from experience where my daughter lives. There's a party room and it has a kitchen, and it costs $100, no matter who you are, to use that space.
No, different.
Now in her building. So
no, different fee. You may charge a fee to use a space, but it was access. This was an access fee, not just like a deposit or something to have an event in that room. You could not even get into that space unless you paid an annual fee.
Well, I'm saying though, that couldn't you say that all building amenities available, blah, 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 with a sliding fee.
Right. The problem is, Betty, we don't want to encourage people to put fees on things that should just be available. When I say fees, let me distinguish. It's not about a usage fee. I rent a community room or a party room or a lounge for an event and I have to pay $100, whatever the hell it is, or $50, right? I don't even have access to it unless I pay a sliding scale fee of $1,000 and I'm paying 50%, $500 a year. Somebody making $30,000 may not have $500 a year to have access to that.
Maybe I sound conservative, but if I know this room because we did have a party in it, a baby shower, that you could not leave that room open all the time to all the tenants because there's a kitchen in there. And
no, you're not hearing. It's not about open. It's about being able to use it. In certain buildings, you're not able to use that room unless you pay an annual fee to the owner.
Oh, an annual fee. Okay, so that is distinguishing between a user fee. Okay.
Exactly.
So perhaps somewhere you need to clarify that.
We have to fix the language, yep.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to also, Joe, say that given I know this building that Judy's in, that I didn't know about the upper space that's outside, that was reflecting a bonus. Is that what you said?
Yes, it would not be there unless the affordable units were there.
And so that space is not available for just anybody. You have to pay some annual fee or something for that.
Exactly.
Is it, can one ever circle back on, or just let it go? Circle back to the
Oh, we do, Betty,
owner?
we do that all the time when they come back for another
thing.
project. And we say, well, we have an issue with this previous project. What can you do there?
I will keep that in mind. Thank you.
Pete put something in the chat, Joe. I think Pete stepped away from the screen, but there's Pete. He had talked about public space for benches. Pete, can you explain that?
Yeah, sometimes we exchange for height. Once the developer gets a height exemption, there's sometimes we have public space available outside for the general public, that is. And that might be something that you might want to include in that as part of the guidelines.
This policy speaks, Pete, only to inclusionary housing creating the additional height or bulk. It doesn't, there are other things in the checklist that we'll look at next month that talk about like public art and the various things we talk about. That's where that belongs. This is very much like the policy that's going to go out.
All right.
Okay? I think we've, at 8:29, we've had 2 hours and we're doing pretty good. Any other thoughts on this? We'll just take this back. Yes, JD.
Just very quick, again, picking you in the second bullet, providing equal apartment finishes. I'm afraid that they could interpret that in a different way. I think we should say the same.
The same, yep, got it. So I think we did some good work on this tonight. We'll return to it again in December. And I encourage everybody to look at the Dropbox. We built out heavily this whole checklist, like for BLP, of what people have to, what the developers have to put in. And it's really going to be helpful for us because then we're going to get the same information and not get all confused about, is it this part of the program, that part of the program, what size units, that kind of stuff. And that'll guide us along. But please look at it prior to the next meeting in December so we can get comments on that and incorporate them in. Please email Jesse and he'll distribute them back.
And I can give, I'm sorry, I'm just jumping in. I wanted to move on to the next topic and give information.
Yes, and we're going to end with that. Yes.
Thanks. So I had a lengthy conversation today with Lauren from Midtown Community Court, and what she shared was that Midtown Community Court still remains closed for the court operation, so basically arraignments. They are open for interfacing with clients. The issue is that OCA, Office of Court Administration, which is like the administrative arm of and determines staffing of all the courts, is saying that there's not enough court clerks. There's a shortage. So, and downtown criminal court needs to be staffed first. So what's happening also is that Midtown Community Court is doing virtual arraignments every Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. only.
All courts are doing that though.
I don't think it's just Joe. I believe all courts are doing arraignments, not just
no. All courts are doing a combination of in-person and virtual arraignments.
Yeah. So even when I was working at Legal Aid Society for Brooklyn Family Court, yes, all the hearings, majority of them were still virtual. But I think the issue is that Midtown Community Court is not functioning every day here like it normally would. And just so everyone is aware, Midtown Community Court, their catchment area is 6 precincts, the 10th, the 13th, 17th, Midtown North, Midtown South, and the 20th, okay? And Midtown Community Court, they do arraignments for non-violent people who are committing crimes that are non-violent and misdemeanors. So normally they would get, the people who were arrested would get a desk appearance ticket. But they can't even, the challenge seems to be they're not even able to engage the people who are being arrested. One of the things Lauren also mentioned is that Manhattan Borough President's Office is aware of this. They're going to be writing a letter to OCA. She also spoke with Matt Green from Corey Johnson's office. I'm not sure if they're writing a letter or not. And that is where we are.
So Marie, I'm glad you brought that up because Gail Brewer's office did come to the Police Precinct Council this month and did ask about the impact on the precinct without having the community court operating. And the commander for Midtown North had said that, she, for the entire time that she's had this command, Midtown Court has not been open, but her experience in Brooklyn is that community courts are so important because it's a place of engagement. Instead of giving someone, instead of giving someone the desk ticket and then they disappear and you never have an opportunity to say, hey, well, what's the root cause? Are you having a problem at home? Okay, we have some services in case you're having a problem with a spouse or in case, whatever it is. And this is a first step of it actually getting people the help that they need instead of being punitive and getting them into the prison system. What I'm glad you brought up also that Lauren said that Gail is writing a letter. I think what might be helpful, Jesse, I don't know if this sounds appropriate, that an administrative letter actually goes out after Gail's letter goes out to say that we'd like to have more information on the status for the community. Because again, I think we'd have to have a full discussion in order to vote as a committee of a position. But I do think it's appropriate to do an administrative letter if the borough president's already pointing out this shortage that we as a community would like to get further information on alleviating that or the time frame, et cetera. I mean, I don't know what your thought is, Joe and Jesse, on that.
Yeah. Because one thing I want to note here is this is clearly both a budget matter and a staffing matter. That's all it is. And if you do not have the Midtown Community Court doing the arraignments, the diversion is not going to happen because people deal with it directly. It says you're not going to get this penalty if you do X. Oh, and by the way, is there an issue going on? Is there drug, whatever it is, and you get people hooked up and we get them out of going into the system. And that's the basis of the community court. So we need to really be on this. I'm going to say, Jesse, that's a letter you should write and say, we need to, it's a problem we've found. We want it addressed and please respond to us. It's like, so we just get it out there. Sabrina?
Quick question though, sorry, because I was going to suggest this earlier, but Dolores, you jumped in. I was going to say possibly writing a letter, but I was going to ask, does the community board normally sign on to a letter like that the borough president is doing to OCA, or would we?
If she asks us to.
If it was a sign-on letter, she probably sent it already.
Oh.
I mean, I think I feel we've got the significant information. I think if you're asked, I think you should feel comfortable in my mind if you're, you like you said, you're
an admin letter then.
The budget. Well,
no, you want us to do a regular
admin letter. I just want to be clear. Like an admin, I'll be honest with you. If we're advocating if we want to write a letter advocating for the court and it being getting the resources, like Joe just said, the staffing and the funding it needs to open, that. I think the power of the board, that's the power of the board means something there. If we're asking for information, then I think an administrative letter. And I'll just say, I think we're on record, we're supportive of Midtown Community Court. We work with Midtown Community Court. I think if you guys would feel comfortable writing a very simple.
I'd like to make a motion.
Well, there you go. There's a motion.
I have a question.
Yes, I was going to say, Sabrina, you're next. And then we'll go to the motion.
What happens with these people who don't have a day in the court? Do they get a sentence? Where do they go sentenced to Rikers Island?
No.
These are desk tickets. These are desk tickets. They just have to come back to court. What we lose in the community court is an opportunity to engage with actual folks that can provide help. Because there's a conversation happening. A judge can actually say, hey, what actually is happening here? And then say, listen, I'm going to direct you to,
appropriate services that you might got. But
and the services are right in the court.
What is it? I'm just not familiar with courts. Do they just have to pay money? What is it? What type of ticket?
No. The services are right in the court. So let's say so-and-so is been arrested because they've done some sort of like misdemeanor assault kind of thing, right? Oh, they're homeless. Oh, let's talk to so-and-so who can get you an entry here. Oh, I stole this because I'm hungry. Oh, really? We can get you into a safe haven. It's this whole sort of like engaging with people. Or I'm out of my house because I have an order of protection against my wife. I screwed up. Oh, let's help, like this, like that's what they do, and it's not happening. It grabs the low level offenders. And if I said in our prior meeting, if it helps 10% of the low level offenders, that's 10% more people who have some path, not to do it again or whatever.
So what are they doing? They're just giving them a letter. That's it.
No, they're not staffed by court officers, so they can't do the arraignments, and therefore they're not functioning. Like there's not even a function happening.
I see.
So, yeah, I agree. So JD, I hear a motion.
Before JD gives the motion, I just want to share one more thing that Lauren shared about Midtown Community Court. Sorry, JD. It's just that something that she came to us and spoke about was the rapid engagement program that really began because of bail reform. And so, and that's supposed to be the program where you engage folks right when the day of arraignment. Anyway, she said that it started at the end of, it actually started at the end of March, but they've received no referrals from Midtown North or Midtown South, which is the two precincts that they're supposed to be getting referrals from. And I asked why, and she said, well, she was told from Midtown North that the arrests for misdemeanors and DATs, the desk appearance tickets, are low. Then at another time, she stated that the arrests occurring at night, and she said, she said, what she really believes is happening is that the police officers are asked to do too much. How are they going to engage folks when that's really not their role? And she thinks the solution is having her people inside of the precinct to engage those who are arrested. It shouldn't really be the role of the police officer.
I would say that is a different letter. I think first we got to get the court open and then comment on the functioning. Because if there's no court officer, it's not open. That's the problem.
Yeah, and Maria, she's new in her role. And when that court is open, it literally is almost attached to the precinct.
It's attached to the precinct, really.
Yeah, and so the way it's worked in the past, it's actually been almost seamless.
I'm fine with it being a different letter. I disagree that it's something different and the court needs to be open for that, right? It's me and you engaging. You've just been arrested. I'm engaging you, and I'm saying we're going to meet at another time, or I'm connecting you to other.
Forget it. I'm done.
Midtown Community Court doesn't need to be open for that to occur. But
so now we're going to JD's motion.
Forgot what it was, Joe. I have no idea. Open the court. Open the court.
Second.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a motion about providing staffing and making this a priority of Office of Court Administration. So we'll build some letter out and send it around for people to look at. Is there a second on that? Second, Dolores. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? Anyone present and eligible? Passes. All right. So we'll pick up. Sorry, Katie, you have no voice.
Can I just ask a sort of related question? And Jesse, I just may be so out of process on this, and I apologize, but is this the kind of thing, like, as you were saying, Joe, there's clearly a funding issue and stuff here to get the court opened again. Is this the kind of thing that we should have put into our budget?
Oh no, I think it's a funding, it's a priority issue, meaning they're choosing to take their resources. Not that there's no funding, they have a staffing problem, so they're putting them downtown, not in the Midtown Community Court. It's not like there's no money.
An allocation issue. That's not to say you couldn't make it.
It's allocation, not funding.
Yeah, I mean, if we knew about this, if this conversation was happening 6 months ago, if we were aware of it, I mean, I think that's the issue. But it sounds like it's more of an allocation issue. But I think next year, if we're seemingly in the same place for some whatever reasons, or not back, we're only back 50%, then I think we're saying, you know, or we can even take, let's say this, you write the letter now, it comes out of December, come February, when the preliminary budget comes out, nothing has changed at the Midtown Community Court. We have Jessica's not on right now, but and it'll be someone else, but whoever is running the budget task force, right? We can say that at that time and say, you know, nothing has changed in this situation since we wrote the first letter
3 months ago.
Your budget has nothing to do with to fix the problem. You need to put more money in the FY23 budget to solve this problem.
Right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Can I make a motion?
Eddie. Second by Leslie. Great. And again, thank you everybody for a good start discussion. We're going to pick it up again on inclusionary housing stuff in December. Thanks everybody. See you next month.
Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah,
Happy
good night.
Thanksgiving.